Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be doing a battery relocation on the Honda Civic EF. So I'm going to be moving the battery from the engine bay to the rear hatch or the trunk, and I'm going to show you how to do the whole process. So if you've been wondering how to do a battery relocation, it's basically the same procedure. I'm going to walk you through the whole thing so that you know how to do it. I've done it on a few cars now and it's the same process. So let's get right into it. I'll show you exactly what you need to do. So first things first is you need to get the equipment and all the parts that you need for this. So you're going to need a battery cable. Now I like to use a battery cable from a BMW E36. The reason why is because they've already got the terminal attached and it's a good quality one. It's a real fat cable, and also they've got this cool little distribution box you see here where you can attach the battery cable and then you can attach all your bits in the engine bay, such as the starter motor wire and everything, right to this terminal here. And it makes it really easy. If you don't have this, you're going to have to find another way of connecting the cable to the starter motor and all the other positive bits in the engine bay. So this just makes it real easy. Basically any E36 should have this cable so you can get them at the wreckers and stuff. If not, then you're going to need to get a real fat battery cable, probably a 0 gauge to use for this, as well as a battery terminal and a way to distribute everything off at the engine bay. So along with that, you're going to need a ground cable such as this one. This is also from the BMW, but you can use probably one you already have in your car. You can probably just shift that into where you're putting the battery, and you're going to need to ground the battery. And the last thing you're going to need is a battery tray or some way to tie the battery down in the trunk. So this is one I've ordered off eBay. It looks to be pretty decent quality. It's got the bottom tray which you can tie down using bolts to the floor, which is what I'm going to do. And then you can just tie it down using these clamps. So these are the parts I'm going to use. You're going to need to use something similar if you're doing it. And now let's get right into it. So now that you got your parts, the next thing you need to figure out is how you're actually going to run your cables. So you're basically going to have to tie them into here where the positive cables are going to the battery. And then you're going to have to run the main battery cable through here somehow into the cabin, into the trunk. So what you want to look for is big rubber grommets that will fit the cable through the firewall somehow. Now, for example, I have found this one. You can see here in mine, it's a big fat opening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a slit into this grommet and I'm going to run the cable through here and through the back of the car. So basically you want to find something like that that you can use to run the cable through. Most cars should have something, so I recommend doing it that way, but I would start with this step and make sure that you can actually run the cable through here, because some cars have very closed off firewalls which might make it difficult. But find the gap and then we can move on to finding a place for the battery. So the next thing that you have to do is find a place for the battery in the back. So I've grabbed the battery tray and I'm trying to find a spot in the trunk I can put it. As you can see, that's what the trunk looks like. Now the only place I can see that I can realistically fit it, I mean maybe I could put it there, but the problem is that the frame rail runs here and I don't have access to the underneath for the bolts. So the only place I can really see is here, where I'll be able to drill and bolt through here. I'll be able to bolt through here, and I'll be able to drill a hole and bolt one through here. Now what you need to make sure is that you can actually access the underneath. So what I mean by that is, we go under the car. You see how there's the frame rail? We need to make sure that we can actually drill through the floor and bolt under the floor and not bolt there, because we can't access the bolts under the frame rail. So I believe that I'll be able to access this part here, and obviously this part here. Now another thing to keep in mind, most cars have a board that sits there. So obviously that board's not going to be able to fit back once I put the battery in. So I'm either going to have to cut the board or just chuck it out entirely. I'm probably just going to chuck it out entirely, and I'll just leave the carpet sitting on top of this stuff because I don't really use the trunk anyway. But otherwise an alternative would be you can cut it out on the board, which I might actually end up doing, and then fit it around there. But it's just something that you need to keep in mind as well. So first thing I'm going to do is tidy up this cable a little bit. So I'm going to cut off all these unnecessary grommets and everything just to make it easier to work with. This can be good to keep for when you're passing it through somewhere that might be a bit sharp, so I'm going to leave that and potentially tape it on later. Tape the ends down where I need it. Okay, so that's the cable ready. Now we can go to putting it in the car. Okay, so next we need to make sure we can pass it through this grommet. So let's pop this grommet out and have a look, see what's behind it. So it looks like we got carpet behind it. So what I'm going to do is cut a slit in there. I'm just going to leave that so we can find out the other end. Okay, so now I can see where it is. So now you can see the blade there, so that's where it is. So there's actually a cutout right for that. You can see it in the rubber. So I'm going to pull the blade out and I'm going to pop that piece out from the inside. Pop that bit out. Okay, so you can see how there was a factory cutout right there for that, so that's perfect. We'll run the cable through there, come down and under the carpet. So what we'll want to do is run the cable from the back. So because there's the battery terminal attached to the cable, I'm going to run it from the back to the front because it's going to be easier to pass those two crimp bits through than it will be to pass the battery terminal. So basically you want to find a spot that you can pass the cable from the rear into the front. Now on mine it seems like this piece under the rear seat is going to be the best. You can see if I put my hand there and then close the seat, there's still a gap. So that's going to be perfect for the cable to run through. So I'm just going to run it through that gap there. Now I need to pull the back seat up to be able to keep going along that line. So we'll go inside and pull the back seat out and the carpet, and we'll find the rest of the pathway up to the front. All right. So now we can see that we can run it through here. We could run it under here and through here and then under the carpet. So basically you want to pull out the carpet. And luckily on this car it's going to be fairly easy. And we can just run it along this channel here. You can see there's a gap there. So that's going to be perfectly fine to run the cable through there, up through there and through that gap into the engine bay. So let's get to that now. Now keep in mind when you're doing this that you want to leave enough room so that this can actually get to the battery so that you can run the cable all the way along. So in this case, I think the cable is just going to have to run like that. I might drill some holes into this and just zip tie it to that to keep it there, but basically it needs to run there and it needs to be able to get onto the battery. So just keep that in mind as you're running the cable along, that you leave enough room for it to actually get to where it needs to go. I want it to sit something like that. Okay. Now inside the car, we need to pull the cable through. Actually, be able to clip it. Oh, look at that! Perfect. Those factory clips actually fit it perfectly. So that's a nice touch. And now you can run it here and through there. Now, where I wanted to put it looks like it might not have enough, which means that I'm going to have to extend the cables from the engine bay and put the distribution block in here. Okay, so the issue I'm having, if you saw just before, is that this cable is not long enough with it going across here and there to actually make it into the engine bay. And so what I've decided to actually do is I'm going to put the battery tray here. I've had a look at it and I think I can make it by having a bolt here in this corner, and one here as well, and the frame rail goes through the middle, and I should be able to put it in there and still be able to bolt it in, and I think that'll be adequate enough to hold it down. Now what's good about this is I actually wanted to put it on this side initially, seeing as though that the driver's on the left side. That's going to keep the balance much better. So therefore I'm going to put it on this end. I'm going to run the battery cable through a little bit more so that it can sit there, and that's going to give me a lot of this extra length to work with to pull it into the engine bay. So now we've got the battery cable all the way through, and now it's in the engine bay. We're going to need to put this on there and put the grommet on. And look at that, it actually fits perfectly, so I can put that distribution block right here where the positive terminal is, and everything can connect up right. So let's just slide this on. Alright, so we've got that in there. For now, I'm just going to pass this through. In any case, I'm just going to leave it there for now, and I'll deal with that once we've actually moved the battery and connected that little distribution block. But for now, that's the battery cable done. So now we just need to mount the battery tray. Okay, so now that we've run the battery cable through the car, it's time to mount the battery tray. Let's get into that. Now, one other thing to note when doing this is you need to find a good spot to ground the battery. So what I'm going to do is, because the battery tray is going to sit here, I'm going to drill a hole here in the edge and I'm going to ground it there. So I'm going to sand down this under seal, and I'm going to make sure it's all bare metal, and I'll put a bolt through there and I'll bolt it down tight, and I think that should be adequate. But generally speaking, you want to find a good spot either there or potentially a strut tower bolt like that. Could actually do it to one of them as well. But you need to have a good grounding spot, and you need to also have good grounding spots on the engine bay side as well. So make sure that you find something good where the battery sits. Okay, so I've got the battery tray mounted, so I've bolted it through there. It's pretty solid. I still need to do these up fully, so I'm going to do that a little bit later just to bolt them up 100%, but it's pretty solid. Now, what I've also done is drilled a hole here for the grounding cable, and I'm going to just sand that down so that there's a clear contact to the chassis on this upside, and the grounding cable is going to sit like that, bolted through there, and then go on the battery terminal. So I'm just going to sand that down to give it a clean contact with the bare metal, and then I'll bolt it in, so we'll get to that right now. Okay, so I've sanded that down. When you're doing this, make sure that you've gone down to the bare metal, because it needs to be bare metal. You can't have paint for it to make a connection. And make sure that it's as clean as possible. So I've tried to sand it right down there. You can kind of see right to the bare metal. And when I put the grounding point on there, you can see that it's going to be metal touching metal, and that's exactly what you want. So you need this to be as good as possible, because this is where your entire battery is going to be grounding off to. So now I'm going to bolt that in, and then we can move on with the next step. And that's it, that's bolted in. So now everything's done on this end, and we can go ahead and finish the connections on the front by the battery at the front end. Okay, so now we're back in the engine bay, and I've just pulled the battery out so I can start making all the connections. So what we need to do is hook this up to this box, and then we need to connect these cables up to here as well, so that the power can go from here to the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these battery terminals off, and I'm going to put these crimp bits on the power cable, and I'm going to ground this cable and ground this cable, and then we can put the battery in the trunk, hook it all up, and it should work. So we'll get to that now.
Okay, so I've got everything hooked up. As you can see here, I've hooked up all the cables together, and I've hooked up one down here as well. I had to do them all on this terminal because they all came from that side and I couldn't get them around, but that's going to work fine. And I've done the ground cable, as you can see here, grounded to the chassis. I sanded it underneath. That's the engine grounded to the chassis. One thing to note when you're making the ground, you want to make sure that you sand down the metal all the way down to bare metal so that you go past the paint. Don't rely on the bolt to do the grounding, but actually sand it down so that once the ring bit is on there, it's actually going to have metal to metal contact and you're going to have a much better ground. So I'm using this one to go from the engine here to the chassis, so that the engine is then grounded to the chassis, and then the battery is grounded to the chassis, and then everything is a complete circuit. So you want to make sure that you have a really good ground for this so that you have no resistance and no issues, and that the current can pass through as it should. It also wouldn't hurt to sand down the bolt, especially on the washer side, if it's a bit rusty like this one was. I've just sanded it down. It'll just help. You could do it without it, but it'll just help to make a good contact, so you may as well do it while you're there. I'm just mounting this terminal box now, so what I've done here is, to do it temporarily, I've just cut a slit in the air box there, and I'm just going to zip tie it through that little tab, just to the air box like that, and that's going to hold it. So for now that'll do. I'd like to do something a bit nicer, but for now, just to get it done, I'm going to do this. I also need to get the cap that sits on top that covers this and covers this, so that you don't risk shorting anything out. I don't have that for now. Unfortunately, the cable that I bought didn't come with it. So what I'm going to have to do is either find one or find another solution. So right now I'm probably just going to tape around it just to keep it insulated, but I'm going to try and find that cap that goes on there. So this is basically all done. I'm just going to do up the zip tie and cover that, and then we can go put the battery in the trunk and finish this job off. All right, we're in the trunk now. Final step. Let's chuck the battery in and see if all this works. So that's positive. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the terminals on, try and start the car, see if everything works, and if everything does work and there's no fire, I'm going to bolt it down. So chuck the terminals on. Okay, negative. Okay. A little bit surprised to see a lack of spark, but let's see what happens. Okay. All right. We have power. I'm going to try to start the car. All right. So it looks like everything went to plan. Beautiful. All right, so that means we can bolt the battery in, bolt the terminals down, and we're good to go. So I'm going to do that now. Alright, the battery is now mounted, the terminals are done up. Let's just test the car one more time, make sure it actually still runs. Beautiful.
So that's it, guys. That's how you do a battery relocation. It's really that simple. You just got to run the cable, do all the connections up at the engine bay, put the battery in the trunk, mount it properly, and then do up the terminals. So I hope that's been helpful and you've seen how to do it if you're potentially thinking of doing it in your car. Just make sure all the contacts are clean, all the grounds are clean and solid. You bolt everything up tight, make sure the battery's secure in the trunk, That's all there really is to it. So I'm going to let the car run for a little bit longer just to make sure everything's good. But generally speaking, you can just let the car run for about 5 minutes, make sure none of the cables are heating up, which means all the connections are good. You're not going to have a fire or anything like that. Just stay there and monitor it, make sure everything's good, and then that's it. So, but once it's starting up like this, because it's firing up real quick and real easy with no struggle, I would say that it's getting enough current, so everything should be fine. But rather safe than sorry, I'm just going to test it out to make sure. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll catch you on the next one.